On this Tuesday night, making history at Rideau Hall. Inuk leader Mary Simon is named Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General.
I am honoured, humbled, and ready.
Who she is and how her appointment could be a powerful symbol of reconciliation. Landmark Agreement, the First Nation now empowered to make decisions for Indigenous children in government care. Frayed nerves as wildfires spread through British Columbia.
Oh, it was terrifying.
What's fanning the flames as more people are ordered out of their homes. And high-speed connection, the potential new rail route between Canada's two biggest provinces.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Farah Nasser.
Good evening. Glad you're with us tonight. We begin with the historic appointment of Canada's new Governor-General. Mary Simon, an Inuk leader, will take the role as the Queen's representative in Canada. She will be the first Indigenous Governor-General in this country. Simon began her career as a journalist, then became a diplomat. In 1994, she was named Canada's first ambassador for Circumpolar Affairs. In 1999, Simon became Canada's ambassador to Denmark. Right now, she is a fellow at the Arctic Institute of North America, where climate change is a major theme of her recent work. Simon's appointment fills a vacancy left by Julie Payette's sudden resignation in January. And it also comes at a critical moment for Canada's relationship with Indigenous peoples. David Akin has our top story tonight.
Let me begin by conveying in the strongest possible terms that I am honoured, humbled, and ready to be Canada's first Indigenous Governor-General.
The PM's pick for the country's 30th Governor-General won near unanimous approval, notably from Indigenous leaders like Natan Obed, president of the organization that speaks for the country's 65,000 Inuit.
I couldn't be happier with the selection. Also, just as an Inuk, to hear somebody speaking in Inuktitut and to be given this particular role, which is such a meaningful role in this particular parliamentary democracy.
Obed's organization was one of a chorus of Indigenous groups to praise Mary Simon's appointment.
She's representing all of Canada, and I know that she'll be able to do an excellent job, in representing all of Canada.
Simon, who will turn 74 in August, was born in Kuujjuaq in northern Quebec. As a girl, she attended a federal day school where instruction was explicitly English only.
My bilingualism is Inuktitut and English. However, based on my experience growing up in Quebec, I was denied the chance to learn French during my time in the federal government day schools.
Her inability to speak French has already raised eyebrows in Quebec, but Simon has vowed to learn French and do business at Rideau Hall in both official languages. But it is her indigeneity, the fact that she is an Inuk woman, that makes her appointment historic and meaningful to many.
There are very important responsibilities associated with my role that will help the working relationship of Canadians and Indigenous people.
She understands that this is a very difficult time in this country and that she has a healing role to play, and she's ready to do it.
Now, one of Simon's first major official acts could be to consider a request from Prime Minister Trudeau to dissolve Parliament and hold an election later this summer. Now, if Trudeau did that, he would be breaking Canada's fixed-date election law. Would Simon let him do that? The two of them say the topic never came up. Farah.
David Akin in Ottawa. Thank you, David. A major rail announcement today also fueling speculation of a federal election this year. The Trudeau Liberals revealed plans for a high-frequency rail line between Toronto and Quebec City. The trains could hit speeds up to 200 kilometres an hour and cut travel time by 25%. The rail corridor is designed to be more sustainable, with 90% of the service running on electricity. It should be up and running by 2030 at a cost of $6 to $12 billion. Now, it is a welcome change in the well-traveled region, but as Mike Le Couteur reports, it doesn't exactly help everyone.
A train platform is not a campaign platform, but it may as well have been for 4 high-profile Liberals announcing the high-profile rail project. The new train line will be high-frequency rail, not high-speed.
We discovered that the incremental increase in speed is not really going to offer the most efficiency when you look at the cost and the time span.
But it would make the trip between Quebec City and Toronto 90 minutes shorter. Popular politically, along a route the Liberals would love to make red. The proposed HFR network will have stops at Quebec City's airport and Trois-Rivières on the way to Montreal. Some existing rails will be used, but the trains will run on mostly new tracks with 2 new stops just outside of Toronto. It's one of the busiest rail corridors of the country, but missing from the map is Windsor, Ontario, which is normally part of that commuter conversation.
This obviously leaves out a very high-density, well-traveled portion of that region, and that's a question I think the government should answer.
It's a big promise that should be popular with key voting blocs. Cue that election speculation. An election has nothing to do with something like this, says Innovation Minister François-Philippe Champagne, but the project could be a boon for battlegrounds in Quebec City and Trois-Rivières, where the Liberals are hoping to maintain or even pick up seats in the next election.
There's a really good opportunity for the Liberal government to gain back a seat. They haven't held a seat in Trois-Rivières since 1984.
The project will have to go through environmental impact assessments and consultations with Indigenous communities before the request for proposal process can begin this fall, which could be in the middle of a federal election. Farah?
Mike Le Couteur in Ottawa. Thank you, Mike. A historic agreement has been signed today between the Cowessess First Nation, the province of Saskatchewan, and the federal government. It gives the nation jurisdiction over its own child welfare system. Many advocates say Canada's child welfare system has become the new proxy for residential schools. Thousands of Indigenous children are currently in care. According to census data from 2016, more than 52% of all children in foster care under the age of 15 were Indigenous. That's nationally. In Saskatchewan, the number is even higher. In 2019, 80% of children in foster care were Indigenous. As Heather Yurix-West explains, the Cowessess First Nation hopes this agreement will help change that.
It's been almost 2 weeks since the Cowessess First Nation shared its unimaginable heartbreak with the rest of the country. The flags here mark as many as 751 previously unmarked graves, many believed to belong to children who died while attending residential school.
It is shameful that here in Cowessess and across the country, children died because of the policy of residential schools.
Residential schools began a legacy of trauma many families have passed down through generations. Today, thousands of Indigenous children are taken into the child welfare system instead. The Cowessess First Nation lost jurisdiction over these kids back in 1951, but a landmark agreement signed Tuesday gives that power back.
This is an important step forward, and at the end of the day, it'll mean fewer children and youth in care. And across the country, we are working with other First Nations to reach similar agreements.
The new child welfare legislation was made possible by Canada's landmark Bill C-92, which empowers Indigenous communities to reclaim jurisdiction. The Mio Pima Tissawan Act gives the nation the right to make decisions over the estimated 165 Cowessess children currently in government care.
The end goal is one day there will be no children in care. I'm 39 years old. I hope that happens in my lifetime. But Cowessess, we have a lot of work to do.
The key is whether or not the federal government is going to provide the resources that will be needed to ensure that all the children receive full benefit from that legislation.
Cindy Blackstock says she's skeptical, having spent years in court with the federal government fighting to get equitable funding for First Nations children in care. Across the country, Indigenous communities say it's time progress is made.
We have said loudly that our First Nations must take the responsibility to take care of our own children. We are developing our own child well-being laws, and it's time for the government to get out of the way.
Cowessess First Nation is hoping for roughly $40 million annually to operate a lodge to help keep families together in the hope of healing trauma that has spawned generations. Heather Urex West, Global News, Calgary.
Now to British Columbia, where there is no rest for fire crews on the front line. They're dealing with dozens of new wildfires after a series of lightning storms struck parts of the province. There are now more than 200 wildfires actively burning in BC. The majority of them, about 70%, are believed to be caused by lightning. More than 60 fires are burning out of control. 13 are considered fires of note, meaning they pose a potential risk and threat to public safety. Robin Gill reports on the communities on edge and under threat from the fast-moving fires.
Once again, fire crews in British Columbia rush to save a neighborhood. This time, it's in the southern Okanagan, between Osoyoos and Oliver. And once again, homeowners are sent into survival mode.
Grab the kids, grab the pets, put them all in the truck, and by then the fire was already spreading really quickly.
48 new fires in just 24 hours. More than 70% of these caused by lightning.
Compared to the seasonal average, we are significantly higher in terms of number of fires and hectares burned for the 5, 10, 15, 20, and 25-year average.
The federal government is deploying military muscle, helicopters and personnel to help move equipment and, if need be, get people out of fire zones. And the fires aren't showing any sign of slowing. In the Duran Lake area, ranchers stayed behind to save their farms and livestock, even though there was an evacuation order.
When you have your cattle that you look after all year up there and they are threatened and you can't get in there to get them, it's pretty emotional.
It's been a very stressful spring period because we've had the driest spring we've had they're saying in the 100-year category.
Back in Oliver, residents are allowed to return after just a few hours.
We were just so relieved and that our houses were all standing and they're okay because it really did come very, very close.
The stress and exhaustion are palpable in a province that's only in the beginning phase of fire season. Robin Gill, Global News, Vancouver.
We're getting a better sense tonight of the devastating impacts of last week's record-breaking heat wave in BC. According to new data from the BC Coroner Service, the number of sudden deaths reported last week was nearly quadruple what's usually seen in that same time period. In the previous 5 years, the number of deaths reported between June 25th and July 1st ranged between 179 and 232. In that same week this year, there were 777. BC's Coroner Service says it's still too early to confirm the cause of death, though the chief coroner says it's believed heat was a significant contributing factor. The same heat wave that has blasted BC is causing major problems for farmers on the prairies. One community in Manitoba says the situation is so severe, it's declared a state of emergency. The rural municipality of Saint Laurent says it's received very little rain. Farmers' dugouts are running dry, and it's not only that, they're also dealing with a major grasshopper infestation.
They're just destroying the fields, and so now there's a feed issue for the livestock as well as a water issue. So it's become to a point where farmers are actually thinking of selling their livestock, selling the farm.
The Manitoba government says it has programs and services available to help farmers manage. In Florida, the body of one of the missing Canadians in the Champlain Towers condo collapse was pulled from the mountain of debris today. Global Affairs Canada confirmed the recovery of the person's remains. The victim's identity has not been officially made public. 3 other Canadians are among the more than 100 people still unaccounted for. At least 70 of the missing were confirmed to be in the 12-story tower when it crumbled early June 24th, according to the Miami-Dade County Mayor. The demolition of the remaining structure Sunday night has allowed search crews better access to dig through the rubble from the initial collapse and to recover more bodies. The confirmed death toll now stands at 36. Stanley Cup fever rises in Montreal. Coming up, the crucial game that had Habs fans on the edge of their seats. for soccer fans in Montreal, some disappointing news. The city announced it has officially withdrawn its bid to host some of the 2026 FIFA World Cup. The city says it made the decision after the Quebec government withdrew financial support. The 2026 World Cup is set to be jointly hosted by the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Edmonton and Toronto are now the only Canadian cities under consideration. Jet setting during the pandemic, ahead where the private planes regularly used by some prominent Canadians touched down while the rest of us stayed at home. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, the federal government has asked Canadians to stay home and avoid all non-essential travel outside of the country. Testing requirements and quarantine measures made it even difficult to try and fly away. But many private jets have been going to and from sunshine destinations, even while Canadian Airlines suspended flights to and from the Caribbean. And some passengers may have been legally able to skip out on staying in a quarantine hotel. As Redmond Shannon reports, jets regularly used by some very high-profile names in the past have been racking up the air miles.
The Bombardier jet, regularly used by Cirque du Soleil founder Guy La Liberté, touches down in Tahiti last fall. It's another 2-hour flight to his private island and his resort that can be rented by guests. Data on flight tracking website ADSB Exchange shows the Bombardier jet made 5 more trips to Tahiti over the coldest months of the pandemic, with extended stays in Hawaii too. The data does not say who was on each flight. He's not the only Canadian who flies in style on a distinctive jet. The Air Drake Boeing 767 made 4 Caribbean trips during the pandemic, including 1 flight from Hamilton, Ontario, while the province was under a stay-at-home order. Since March 2020, the federal government has urged Canadians to avoid non-essential travel, but the definition of essential is left up to the individual.
The government, in describing us as only doing essential travel, never gave any guidelines as to what essential was.
On one occasion this year, Drake was reportedly shooting a music video in the Bahamas. From February until Monday this week, even vaccinated passengers flying into Canada were obligated to pre-book 3 nights in a government quarantine hotel upon arrival. Drake's publicist declined to answer questions about who was on the flights and whether they ever checked in to a quarantine hotel. A spokesperson for La Liberté wouldn't comment on his travels, but said Guy and all guests on the plane scrupulously respected sanitary measures and quarantines. But unlike commercial passengers, it's possible they and many other private jet users relied on rapid molecular test services, getting their negative COVID results before they could even check into a hotel and allowing them to quarantine entirely at home.
There might have been a few instances where after completing that CBSA test kit, they received the result in a timely fashion and they left as you would and as was directed.
Canadian aircraft charter companies did not answer Global News questions about whether they offered this service. Many of their jets have made round trips to the Caribbean earlier this year, even while commercial Canadian airlines agreed to suspend direct flights to the region. Aircraft owned by companies like Irving Oil Transport and Nova Scotia-based CFFI Ventures have flown to Canada from the US this year via mandatory stops in Toronto or Montreal, where the quarantine hotels are located. But the planes then quickly flew on to smaller Canadian airports. CFFI said its fleet is operated in accordance with all guidelines, rules and laws. Irving Oil did not respond to a request for comment. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
Turning anger into something good. Why this 12-year-old Mi'kmaq boy walked 200 kilometres in 6 days. A 12-year-old Indigenous boy in Nova Scotia has ended a long, emotional journey. Landon Toney wrapped up a walk in memory of survivors and victims of residential schools, and it resonated. As Ross Lord reports, the simple gesture struck a real chord with Canadians.
After walking more than 200 kilometers in only 6 days, Landon Toney sprints across the finish line. Triumphant in his grueling walk called Landon's Journey of Awareness. A simple but trying act of endurance that's spreading pride.
Very worth it. The walk, everything. Just the reaction of the people when I got here, it was awesome.
Heady stuff for a boy who just turned 12 years old. Landon's mother, who walked beside him, says he's been advocating for years for more awareness of Indigenous culture. She hopes the powerful symbolism of an Indigenous child walking for empowerment is something all Canadians can support.
He could have been a residential child a few generations ago and hopefully be more open-minded to educating themselves on the hidden truths.
Landon's journey passed through several First Nations communities with a growing number of supporters cheering him on.
Yeah, Landon! Yeah!
An online fundraiser has topped $30,000. How it's spent will be determined at a later date after a review of those most in need.
I hope after this a lot of people open their eyes and get educated on everything that has happened to our people, especially with the residential schools.
Landon says he's humbled by the outpouring of support and generosity. He says he plans to make more efforts to bring about positive change.
Every single year I'm going to be doing something like this.
Ross Lord, Global News.
A young boy with hope for a brighter future for all of us. That is Global National for this Tuesday. I'm Farah Nasser. Thank you so much for spending part of your evening with us. Tonight's Your Canada is Caddy Lake in southeastern Manitoba. Until tomorrow, take care of yourselves and each other.